Snowy nights have a way of hiding things that don't want to be found. These are 3 nights that still don't make sense to the people who lived them. I was driving north to visit a friend who lived outside a small mountain town in upstate New York. The drive usually took a little over 4 hours. Most of it was highway. The last stretch was a 2-lane road that ran through forest and farmland. I left later than I planned. By the time I reached the outer roads, the sun was already going down. The weather report said light snow overnight, nothing serious. The snow started just after sunset. I was already far outside the city, driving through the outer roads where the streetlights disappear and the houses thin out into long gaps of darkness. The road had been clear when I left. By the time I reached the hills, the snow was falling heavy and fast, thick enough that my headlights turned it into a white curtain. The road narrowed. The trees closed in on both sides. There were no tire tracks ahead of me anymore. I slowed down and kept going, thinking I would reach the highway turnoff in another 10 minutes. But the snow kept building. The road lost its edges. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up. Then the car slid. Not hard, not fast. Just enough that I felt the tires lose grip. I eased off the gas and rolled forward another few feet before stopping. I tried to reverse. The tires spun. I tried again, slower. Nothing. The snow had packed under the wheels. The car was sitting too low. I turned off the engine and sat there, listening to the snow hit the roof. There was no signal on my phone. The heater had already started to weaken. I opened the door and stepped out. The snow reached my ankles immediately. The road behind me was gone. The road ahead looked the same, just white and trees. That was when I saw the light. It came from the right between the trees. A warm yellow glow, steady and still. Not flickering like a car, not flashing. A house light. I closed the door and followed it. The snow was quieter under the trees. The wind dropped. The light grew larger as I walked. After a few minutes, I reached a narrow driveway that curved toward a large wooden house. It sat alone at the edge of the woods. 2 floors, dark roof, smoke rising from a chimney. The porch light was on. I stood there for a moment, watching the windows. No movement, no sound, just warmth behind glass. I walked up the steps and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. A man stood there, maybe in his late 50s. Gray hair, thick sweater, calm face. "You're stuck," he said. I nodded. "You can stay here for the night," he said. "Road won't clear until morning." I thanked him before he even finished speaking. He stepped aside and let me in. The heat hit my face right away. The house smelled like wood and old fabric. There were shoes lined neatly by the door, coats hanging on hooks. He pointed down the hall. "Guest room is ready, bathrooms across, kitchen's open." I told him I'd leave first thing in the morning. He nodded. "No rush," he said. The hallway was narrow but clean. The walls were covered in framed photos, families, snowy yards, children with red cheeks, a Christmas tree. I noticed the photos looked old. The colors were faded. The guest room was warm. A heavy quilt on the bed, a small lamp on the nightstand, a window looking out into the trees. The snow was still falling. I sat on the bed and took off my boots. My socks were wet. The carpet was thick and soft under my feet. The house felt settled, like it had been standing there for a long time. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. There was soup on the stove, still warm. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to take too much. As I walked back down the hallway, I heard something. Laughter. It came from below me. Children. High voices, light footsteps, something being dragged across a floor. I stopped near the end of the hallway and listened. The sounds were coming from beneath the house, a basement. I stood there trying to place the direction. The voices rose and fell. Someone giggled. Someone shushed them. I went back toward the front of the house. The man was sitting in a chair by the fireplace, reading. "Do you have kids?" I asked. He looked up. "No." The laughter continued. I waited for him to say more. He didn't. "Is there anyone else staying here?" I asked. He turned a page. "No." I stood there for a moment longer. He didn't look uncomfortable. He didn't look surprised. The fire cracked softly. I thanked him again and went back to my room. The quilt was warm when I pulled it over me. The laughter faded. Outside, the snow kept falling. For a while, the house felt like the safest place I could be. I closed my eyes. I woke up sometime in the night, not suddenly, not from a dream, just the slow feeling of becoming aware. The room was dark. The lamp was off. The snow outside reflected faint light through the window, turning the curtains pale. The house was quiet. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, soft and quick, moving back and forth beneath the floor. A child laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't excited. Just a short sound, like someone reacting to a game. I sat up in bed. The sound came again. Something scraped across concrete. A chair leg, maybe. Then another giggle. Then a voice telling someone to be quiet. I checked my phone. 2:14 a.m. I lay there for a minute listening. The sounds weren't constant. They came in waves. A few minutes of movement, then silence, then another burst of activity. I told myself it was probably pipes. Old houses made noise. Maybe there was a radio somewhere, but it didn't sound like that. It sounded like children playing. I got out of bed. The floor was cold under my feet. I opened the door slowly and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark except for a dim light at the far end, the fireplace room. The sounds were clearer out here. They were coming from beneath me. I followed the hallway to a narrow door I hadn't noticed earlier. It led to a staircase, a basement. The light switch was on the wall. I flipped it. The stairs went down into a concrete room. Storage shelves, a washing machine, a furnace, old boxes stacked against the walls. No toys, no furniture, no signs of anyone living there. The basement smelled like dust and damp wood. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and listened. Nothing. No footsteps, no voices, just the hum of the furnace. I went back upstairs and closed the door. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, the laughter started again. This time it came from farther down, from the back of the house. I followed it. The hallway narrowed near the end. The walls changed from painted drywall to old wood paneling. There was another door at the very end. It stood open. Beyond it was a small room I hadn't seen before. The floor was bare wood. The walls were unfinished. A single window looked out into the trees. Snow pressed against the glass. At the far side of the room was another door. This one led outside. I could see the woods through it. The door was open. Snow had blown inside. A thin white line stretched across the floor. The room was empty. No furniture, no lights, no sound. The laughter had stopped. I stepped inside. The cold air moved around my ankles. The forest beyond the door was dark and still. The trees stood close together. No footprints, no path, just snow and branches. I stood there for a few seconds, then closed the door. The room went quiet. I went back down the hallway. As soon as I reached the guest room, the voices started again. This time louder, running footsteps. Something bumped into a wall. A voice said my name. Not clearly, not fully, just the sound of it shaped like my name. I locked the door. I sat on the bed with my coat on. The sounds moved across the ceiling, back and forth, like someone pacing. Then came knocking, 3 slow hits from inside the walls. I held my breath. The knocking moved, from the wall to the door. 3 more hits, then silence. Beat. Then a sudden crash from the back of the house. I opened the door and ran down the hallway. The open room was at the end again. The outside door was open. Snow had blown farther inside now. The woods looked closer. The air was colder. I stepped toward it. Something shoved me, hard, from behind. I fell forward and hit the floor. The door slammed shut. The lights went out. The hallway filled with movement. Footsteps, running, laughter, too close. I scrambled up and ran back to my room. I locked the door and pushed the chair against it. The walls shook. Something hit the door from the other side. Once, twice, then fists, heavy and fast. The voices rose, not children anymore, deeper, angry. The knocking turned into pounding. I sat on the bed and stared at the handle. It rattled, then stopped. The house went quiet, so quiet I could hear my own breathing. I did not sleep after that. Morning came without sound, no alarm, no voices, no footsteps, just light pressing through the curtains. For a moment I thought the night had been a dream. Then I saw the chair against the door. I moved it away and opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty. The lights were on again. The house looked exactly the way it had the night before. Warm, still, clean. I walked toward the fireplace room. The man was sitting in the same chair, reading. He looked up. "Road should be clear now," he said. I nodded. My throat felt dry. I asked where the bathroom was again, even though I already knew. I just needed to hear a normal voice. He pointed down the hall. Nothing about him had changed. Nothing in the house looked disturbed. No broken door. No snow inside. No signs of struggle. I got my coat and boots from the entryway. The shoes were still lined up neatly. I stood there for a moment listening. No sound from the basement, no laughter, no movement. I opened the front door. The snow had stopped. The road was visible again. My car was half buried, but the plow had passed sometime in the early morning. I turned back. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. I walked out and closed the door behind me. The house went quiet. It took me 15 minutes to dig the car out. My hands went numb even with gloves on. The sky was gray. The woods stood frozen and still. As I drove away, I looked back. The house was already hard to see through the trees. The driveway looked unused. No tire tracks, no footprints, just smooth snow. I followed the road until I reached a small town about 20 minutes away. A gas station was open. I pulled in and went inside. The cashier was a woman in her 40s. She looked tired. I asked if there was a house on the back road near the woods, a big wooden one with a long driveway. She stared at me. "Which road?" she asked. I told her. She shook her head. "No one lives out there." I told her I stayed there overnight. Her face changed. She stepped back from the counter. "That place is empty," she said. "Has been for years." I told her about the man. She called someone from the back. A second woman came out, older, wearing a heavy jacket. I repeated everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Families used to move in. They never stayed long." I asked why. She said, "Same reasons you left." I asked what happened to them. She said, they stopped trying." I didn't understand. She said the house never keeps anyone, but it never lets anyone stay either. People leave because they think they have to, but some don't leave when they should. I asked who the man was. She said no one had seen anyone there in a long time. She said the last people who tried to live there boarded it up and left town. I asked about the children. She looked at the floor. There were never any children. I left without saying anything else. I drove for hours. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. When I reached my friend's place, I told him I had changed my plans. That night, I checked my phone. There were photos taken while I slept, from inside the room, Pictures of the bed, the door, my face. I deleted them. I still don't know who lives in that house. I don't know if it was a family. I don't know if it was something else. I don't think the house was ever empty. Someone lives there, and they don't let anyone else stay. Some of these stories continue because people keep encountering the same systems. If you want to hear the next ones, staying subscribed is how they reach you. The snowstorm wasn't supposed to be heavy. That's what the ranger station had said. Light snowfall, reduced visibility, nothing serious. My friend Mark and I were driving through a forest road in northern Michigan, heading toward a small town where we had booked a cabin for the weekend. The trip was meant to be simple. 2 days away from work, quiet, snow hiking, a fireplace. We left late in the afternoon. By the time we reached the forest road, the sky was already dark. The snow started lightly at first, just small flakes drifting sideways in the headlights. Then the wind picked up. The road narrowed. The trees closed in. The snow thickened. Visibility dropped fast. We slowed down. The road signs disappeared under snow. The GPS lost signal. The map on my phone stopped loading. Then the road curved sharply downhill. The car slid. Not far, not hard, but enough to make us stop. We tried to move again. The wheels spun. The snow was already packing under the tires. We sat there for a minute, listening to the wind move through the trees. Neither of us said anything. It was clear we weren't driving anywhere. Mark opened the door and stepped out. The snow reached halfway up his boots. "There's a building back there," he said, pointing down the road. I followed him. About 100 yards back through the trees stood a large concrete structure. Tall walls, broken windows, a rusted gate half buried in snow, an old factory. We walked toward it. The front entrance was blocked, but one of the side doors was hanging open. The wind had pushed it against the wall. Inside, the air was still. The building was wide and deep. Rows of empty rooms, rusted machines, thick dust on the floor except where snow had blown in. The roof was intact. The walls held the wind back. It was warmer than outside. We walked farther in. The place smelled like oil and wet concrete. We found a small office near the center of the building. It still had a desk, a chair, a metal cabinet, no broken glass. We closed the door. The wind faded. The snow became a distant sound. We sat on the floor and waited. At first, it felt like relief. The building was solid. The storm stayed outside. The silence was steady. We ate the snacks we had in our bags. We checked our phones. No signal. We told ourselves the storm would pass by morning. We told ourselves we were lucky to find shelter. That's when we noticed the footprints. They were small, not boot prints, barefoot. They ran along the far wall of the room, half covered by dust. A second set crossed them, then a third. They led out into the hallway. Mark stood up and followed them. I stayed by the door. The main floor opened into a wide production area. Steel beams crossed the ceiling. Rusted platforms hung over empty space. Long conveyor frames cut through the darkness. The footprints crossed the open floor and vanished into dust. Mark crouched near one of the machines. "These aren't old," he said. I looked closer. The edges were still sharp. Something had passed through here recently. Then dust fell from the ceiling. Not a lot, just a thin line drifting down between the beams. We both looked up. The space above us was too high to see clearly. Something moved along the rafters. Slow, heavy. Metal creaked. Neither of us spoke. We went back into the office and closed the door. We sat against the wall and listened. The wind pressed against the building. The snow hit the windows, the factory settled around us. For a while, nothing happened. Then we heard breathing, not close. Somewhere down the hall. Slow, heavy, like someone standing still, waiting. "Beat," Mark whispered. "We're not alone." We went back into the office and closed the door. The room felt smaller than before. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower, the air heavier. We sat on the floor with our backs against the metal cabinet. The wind pressed against the building, making the steel beams groan. Snow slid down broken windows somewhere far above us. For a while, nothing moved. Then the temperature dropped. Not suddenly, not sharply. Just enough that I noticed my breath again. A thin white cloud in front of my face. Mark pulled his jacket tighter. "That storm's getting worse," he said. I nodded. The building made a low sound. Not a hum, not a whistle. Something slow and deep, like air being pulled through long pipes. We stayed where we were. Time stretched. The silence wasn't empty, it felt layered, like there were sounds buried under it. Then something scraped across metal, far away, a long drag, then another. Mark stood up. "Someone's here," he said. I didn't answer. We opened the door and stepped back onto the factory floor. The wide space looked different. The dust on the ground had shifted. Fresh lines crossed the old tracks, not from boots, from something being pulled. We followed them. They passed under a hanging platform and disappeared near a stairwell that led to an upper level. The steps were steel. Each one rang softly when we climbed. Above us, the ceiling stretched into darkness. Beams crossed like ribs. Chains hung loose and still. Halfway up, I felt pressure in my chest. Like the air had thickened, I had to breathe slower. Mark stopped and leaned on the railing. "You feel that?" he asked. I nodded. We reached the upper level. The walkway ran along the wall. Below us, the main floor dropped into shadow. On the concrete wall beside us were chalk drawings. Not graffiti, games, circles, squares, lines connecting shapes. Like children had been playing here. The drawings were clean, not faded, not old. We heard something above us, a slow movement across metal. Not footsteps, something heavier. We looked up. A shape crossed between the beams. Long, too long. Its outline stretched as it moved, like arms pulling a body forward. Then it stopped. The pressure in my chest got worse. I had to lean forward to breathe. Mark grabbed my arm. "Look," he said. A cat sat at the far end of the walkway. Thin, gray. Snow clung to its fur. Its eyes reflected our headlamp light. Bright, unblinking. It didn't move, it just watched. We stepped closer. The cat turned its head, then its body. Then it climbed the wall. Not jumped, climbed. Its claws dug into the concrete and it pulled itself up between the beams. Dust fell on our shoulders. The metal above us creaked. Mark said, "We need to go." We turned back toward the stairs. The air felt thicker now. Each step was slower. My chest hurt. The building groaned. Something dragged itself along the ceiling. Long hands reached down between the beams, not touching us, not grabbing, just stretching, testing the space. We ran. The stairwell echoed with our steps. The main floor rushed up toward us. We crossed the open space toward the office. The door was closed. We hadn't closed it. Mark pulled it open. The room was darker than before. We went inside and shut the door. We locked it. We pushed the desk against it. The breathing started again. Outside the room, slow, deep. The sound of weight shifting, chains swayed, metal tapped softly. Something moved along the wall. Not close, not far. Just enough to be heard. We sat on the floor and waited. The storm raged outside, the factory held us inside, and the night kept going. We stayed locked inside the office. The door held. The desk didn't move, but the sounds did. They circled the room, sometimes close enough that we could hear breath pass under the door, sometimes high above us, moving along the beams. Metal rang out when something stepped where no one should have been able to stand. Chains swayed, then stopped, then started again. The pressure in my chest never went away. I had to sit upright to breathe. Mark kept checking the handle. The room was cold now. Our hands went numb. The storm outside screamed against the walls. Snow hit the windows like gravel. The factory answered with slow, heavy creaks. Then came barking, distant at first. A dog, then another, far away, somewhere beyond the trees. They barked and barked. The sounds came through broken windows and empty spaces. The barking made the factory change. The chains stopped moving. The breathing faded. The weight above us shifted. Then everything went quiet. Too quiet. We didn't move. We waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then longer. We stayed until the light began to change. Gray slipped through the cracks around the door. The storm softened. The wind slowed. Mark pushed the desk aside. We unlocked the door. The hallway outside the office was empty. The wide floor was still. No dust moved. No chains swayed. No shadows crossed the walls. We walked slowly toward the exit. Our footsteps echoed. The building felt hollow again. The door to the outside was half buried in snow. We pushed it open. Cold air rushed in. The forest stood quiet and white. The road was visible again. We didn't look back. We walked until our legs hurt. We found a truck parked near the road. The driver let us sit inside until we warmed up. He took us to the nearest town. At the diner, people stared when they heard where we had been. At the diner, a man finally spoke. "That place isn't empty," he said. We asked who lived there. He shook his head. "Doesn't matter, it's theirs." Another man said, "People go in thinking it's abandoned, like they can take it." He looked at us. "They don't like that." We asked why they let us go. The woman behind the counter said, "Maybe they decided you weren't staying." No one smiled. The man said, "You were lucky. Most people don't get that choice." When we left town, I looked back at the forest. The factory wasn't visible from the road, but I knew exactly where it was. I still don't know who decided I was allowed to leave, but I know someone did. Every winter I check the news for that road, just to make sure it hasn't found anyone new. I rented the cabin for 3 nights. It was meant to be a short break. A few days away from work, snow on the ground, long walks, quiet mornings. The cabin sat just outside a small town called Pine Hollow. It was listed online as remote but accessible. The photos showed a simple wooden place with a porch, a fireplace, and a path leading into the woods. I arrived in the late afternoon. Snow covered everything. The road into the property was narrow but clear. Tall trees stood on both sides, their branches heavy and still. The cabin was already warm when I unlocked the door. The heater was running. The lights were on. The owner had left a note on the table. "Make yourself comfortable." I dropped my bag near the door and walked through the rooms. There was a small kitchen, a living room with a couch and a fireplace, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a large window that looked out into the trees. Outside, the snow kept falling. It was quiet in a way that made time feel slow. I made coffee and stood by the window watching the forest. After a while, I put on my boots and coat and stepped outside. The snow was fresh and soft. My footprints were the only marks on the path. The woods were close to the cabin, no fence, no clear boundary, just trees and white ground. The path curved gently through the trees. It wasn't steep. It wasn't rough. It felt like a trail people used in every season. The snow covered it evenly, smoothing the ground into a long white ribbon that led deeper into the forest. I walked without checking the time. There were no signs, no fences, no markers, just trees and snow. The woods felt open. The branches were high, the trunks spaced far enough apart that I could see a long distance in every direction. Nothing blocked my view. Nothing hid. The snow softened every sound. Even when I stopped, the forest stayed quiet. No birds, no wind, no movement, only my breath. I followed the trail until the cabin was no longer visible. I thought about turning back, but there was no reason to. The path was easy. The light was still good. The cold felt steady, not sharp. It felt like the kind of walk people take when they want time to pass. I checked my phone. No signal. The screen showed the time. I put it back in my pocket and kept walking. The trail narrowed slightly and dipped down into a shallow stretch of trees where the snow lay thicker. My boots sank deeper with each step. The air smelled clean, cold, still. I slowed down. The forest ahead looked the same as the forest behind. I turned around. My footprints stretched back in a straight line, fading into the distance. The trees on both sides stood evenly spaced, their branches heavy with snow. Nothing moved. I stayed there for a moment. Then I continued. The path widened again and leveled out. I noticed how warm I felt. My gloves were dry. My jacket blocked the wind completely. The cold sat on my skin but didn't reach through. It felt easy to stay out. The trail curved again. The forest thickened slightly. The light filtered down through the branches in soft gray layers. Time felt slow. Or maybe it felt absent. There was nothing marking it. No sounds, no traffic, no voices, just snow and trees and my steps. I stopped again. I listened. Nothing answered. I realized I had no sense of how far I'd gone. The cabin could have been close or far. The forest didn't change. It didn't give clues. I turned back again. My footprints were still there, one straight line, undisturbed. I followed them. After a few minutes, the cabin roof appeared between the trees. I felt relief when I saw it. Not because I was afraid, because I hadn't realized how quiet it had become. The cabin stood exactly where I had left it. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The porch light glowed faintly through the falling snow. It looked warm, inviting. I reached the door and stepped inside. The heater hummed. The room smelled like coffee and wood. My coat steamed slightly as the cold left it. I hung it by the door and sat on the couch. The forest filled the window. The snow kept falling. It felt good to be inside. Safe. Still. I stayed there for a long time, watching the trees, letting the silence settle around me. That's when I decided to go back out. That's when I noticed someone standing ahead of me, between two trees, far enough that I couldn't see their face. They weren't dressed for winter, no coat, no hat, just a thin summer shirt and dark pants. They stood still, watching me. I stopped. The snow fell between us. I waited for them to move. They didn't. I called out. No response. I took a few steps closer. The figure stepped back, then turned and walked behind a tree. I reached the tree. There was no one there, no footprints, nothing, just untouched snow. I stood there for a while. The forest was silent. I turned back toward the cabin. My footprints were the only trail. I followed them. Halfway back, I heard something behind me. Another set of steps, slow, matching my pace. I stopped. The sound stopped. I turned around. The path was empty. I walked again. The steps followed, not close, not far, just behind me. I reached the cabin and went inside. I locked the door. I stood there, listening. The snow tapped against the windows. The trees creaked. The forest settled. After a few minutes, I told myself it was nothing, just a trick of sound. I made dinner. I turned on the lights. The cabin felt warm again. Safe. Then I saw the shadow pass across the window. The shadow crossed the window and vanished. I stood still. The lights were on inside. The room reflected back at me in the glass. My own face looked pale. I waited. Nothing moved. I went to the door and opened it slowly. Cold air rushed in. Snow blew across the porch. The trees stood quiet and close. I stepped outside. The ground was untouched except for my earlier trail. No second set of footprints. No sign that anyone had been there. I walked around the cabin. The snow reached the bottom of the windows. The roof was white. The porch railing was buried. Everything looked exactly the way it should. I went back inside and locked the door. The heater hummed. The smell of food still hung in the air. I sat on the couch and watched the window. Nothing crossed it again. After a while, I turned off the lights and went to bed. The bedroom was dark except for the faint glow of snow outside. The forest pressed close to the glass. I slept for a few hours. Then I woke up. Not from a sound, from the feeling of being watched. I lay there staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet. Then I heard movement outside. Slow steps in the snow. Close, right under the window. I held my breath. The steps stopped. Something blocked the light. If it didn't move, I waited. The shadow stayed. I reached for my phone. The screen lit the room. The shadow slipped away. I jumped out of bed and pulled the curtain aside. No one was there, no footprints, just smooth snow. I didn't sleep after that. When morning came, the sky was pale and cold. The storm had passed. I made coffee and stood by the window. The forest looked calm, normal. I put on my coat and stepped outside. The air was sharp. The snow glittered. I followed my trail from the day before. It led into the woods. Halfway down the path, I noticed something. There was only one set of footprints, mine, even where I had stopped and turned around. No other marks, no overlap, no disturbance. I reached the tree where the figure had stood. The snow around it was untouched. I stood there for a long time. The forest didn't move, no birds, no wind, just stillness. Then I heard breathing, not loud, close behind me. I turned, no one. The breathing stopped. The silence felt heavier than before. I went back to the cabin. I packed my bag. I loaded the car. Before I left, I walked once more around the building. The snow around the cabin was clean. No tracks, no signs. But when I reached the porch, I saw something on the glass. A handprint. Not smeared, not pressed, just the faint outline of a palm, frosted onto the window from the outside. I stood there until my hands went numb. Then I got in the car and drove away. I drove straight through the night. I didn't stop, I didn't turn around, I didn't check the mirrors. I kept my eyes on the road until the trees disappeared and the sky turned gray. When I reached the highway, I pulled over and sat in the car with the engine running. My hands were shaking. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the cold had made me imagine things. I told myself there had been no one in the woods. I drove home. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't look up the cabin. I didn't leave a review. I blocked the owner's number. For weeks, I kept my curtains closed at night. I stopped going for walks. I avoided parks and wooded roads. I stayed where there were lights and noise and people. Sometimes when I wake up before dawn, I still feel like someone is standing just outside the edge of whatever place I'm in. Not trying to get in, just waiting. And I know I will never go back into the trees again.